Yeah, good morning. Well, I don't think it's good morning anywhere. Maybe it's like some parts of Asia Pacific, which you shouldn't be up this early in the morning. You should go back to bed. But good afternoon, good evening to the rest of you, rest of the world. Thank you for joining us here at Code It Live. I'm your host, Sam. With me, I have my good friend Art. How are you, sir?
I'm doing great. How about you?
Not too bad, not too bad. Can't complain. Folks joining us here on Coded Live, particularly on Twitch, you might be, just stopping by. In which case, this is not a regular, coding stream. This is the user group meeting. And for those of you from the user group meeting who are regulars who are joining us, hello, hello. Art, we got some stories to tell. You can tell like how long we have been doing, and it's all virtual now. So. I'm just glad that we are still doing this. So this is a user group meetup, and we got Art here to talk about some really good stuff today. But I'm going to take a couple of minutes before I give it over to Art to talk about some housekeeping stuff. So let me see if technology works with us today. Share my screen. It's funny. This is all browser based, and anytime you update your OS, the browser tends to forget that you have, you've given those preferences and the thumbs up. But today we are good. Okay, so welcome people to this user group, and if you're looking for the Columbus, Ohio-based Windows Phone user group or Windows user group or app dev user group, they don't exist because they have all been kind of evolved into what we have today, which is the global app dev user group. And this is as generic as it gets. We had the Columbus connection because that's where we met in person until the global pandemic hit. So this is global. And I hope we don't have to change our name again. The next time we have to change a name, like we have left Earth, we have colonized other planets, and we can talk it like make it the Galaxy app dev system, hopefully. But if you're joining us new, tell your friends and your family about us. You can find us online on user group meeting or Meetup, and then we have a website. We have our Twitter handle, and we meet right here on third Mondays, right here on Twitch. For folks in the Ohio region where we kind of started, we do get together. We are hoping for sometime later this year. We do have a Christmas get together, but we haven't done that. So hopefully this year we can. But at least we get to hang out here virtually. Okay, so we do have some sponsors who kind of help us. We had a lot more sponsors who gave us, the space. And Art, the thing we missed the most about user groups is the pizza. Just hanging out and playing. We used to play like ping pong and all that good stuff. But
Oh, yeah.
hey, at least after work, you don't have to drive and fight traffic, right? You can just like lay back at your desk or on your couch. We're here. So we are supported by a few orgs here, Progress and Microsoft and Visual Studio Live. We'll talk about that in just a second. We always try to recap or kind of look ahead at some things that are going on, around us, smaller regional conferences or bigger ones. This is our sister user group. This is the .NET user group that meets in Columbus, Ohio. They meet fourth Thursday, and I'm a little hesitant. And I was looking at their meeting this month, and I remembered that I got to get out and speak because this month is me. But that's coming up towards the end of April, and they're meeting in person, but they're trying to live stream. So. We're trying to see what works. But, if you are around Columbus, Ohio, and, end of April, come and hang out with us.
Kind of a bold new world out there now.
Yeah, it is. It is. Everyone's at a different place, to each to their own. We can, cautiously take steps towards what is the new normalcy. But we got a few more things coming up. If you are, open to doing some in-person things, we got a big conference coming up in Columbus, Ohio. That's Telerik, May 6th. It's not May the 4th with the Force. This is still some kind of a force with Art. I don't know if you know about Star Trek. They try to, combine with the big Marvel or whatever release is every summer. So this year it's Doctor Strange.
The one time I spoke there, it was Guardians of the Galaxy.
Yeah. So that's coming up, folks. And if you haven't gotten tickets yet, this might be your last week to get tickets before they get like swag out. But it's going to be
They have
a day of
extremely cool
solid
swag.
Yeah, they do, and they ship it out to you. I don't know what they're doing this year though. So, come and join us for Star Trek. A few more things, and these, if you are, wanting to, get out there and, speak a little bit based on whatever projects you are passionate about, these may be good opportunities. This is a couple of my friends up in Michigan. This is Beer City Code, and they're coming up on August, August 6th, if I can read the top of the screen. And they're, I think they actually just may have closed their call for speakers, but, a great 2-day conference. Then we have Codepalooza, which is coming up in Louisville, Kentucky. This is Chad Green and his entire team, and their CFP, I think, is still open if you want to,
just extended it.
Oh, perfect. If you want to, raise your hand to speak. So great conference, great regional place to, get together with folks from the Midwest. They get speakers from, pretty much all around the country as well. Speaking of, big conferences, I said we partner with Visual Studio Live. This is actually 1105 Media that puts it together, and they do big conferences all around the country. These are like, big, like 3-4 day conferences with workshops and all that good stuff. Their next one is coming up in Austin, Texas, mid-June. And they got something on Microsoft Campus on August, and then they have the Break Show in Orlando, which is in December. So, things are slowly coming back to normalcy. And if you do go to one of these shows, you get a big discount just being a part of the user group. Okay, and tonight, drum rolls. I have a plastic desk. I can't really do the clapping thing, but, we are super excited to have Art here with us. I've known him for a long time, just an all-out amazing human being. And you are here to talk about something that we all feel, but we don't talk enough about. So, taking care of ourselves, maybe, our friends and family, mental health, and particularly in these days, and how you balance things with work. So, Art, thank you. Thank you for being here. And with that,
I'm glad to be here.
Yeah. Excuse me. With that, let me, hold on, bring my screen down and your screen up. All right. The floor is yours, sir. I'm going to be here, asking questions as we go along, but it's all you.
Thank you. Well, I'm happy to be here. I'm excited to talk about it. I'm excited to talk about this with you. Nobody's really excited to talk about their mental health, especially after, 2+ years of global pandemic, and now, an ongoing war in Europe and everything else that's been going on over the last 2 years. It really feels like things have been accelerating. So this topic becomes more and more important. And I guess first things out of the way, I work at a small software consultancy in Omaha, Nebraska called Adhd. They're a great place to work. And I really enjoy what I do, and they help me get to do it. So that's why they get that's why they get their name on part of the slides. So
I for what it's worth, I love Omaha. It's such a beautiful place to be. Great food, great people. And
it does have some really good food.
Yeah. And this may be a small trivia that folks might not know. To get to Omaha, Nebraska downtown, like the airport, you land in Nebraska, but then you actually, I think if I'm right, Art, you actually have to go through parts of Iowa.
It depends on which way you go, but yeah,
like
if you're going from the airport to downtown, there's a portion of Iowa that is west of the Missouri River because of it's an oxbow. At one point, the river flooded and changed course, but that was after they drew the state lines. So
there you go.
No, it's a nice place. Like, we got snow, but today it was something in the 60s. So, all right. So this is me. And I'm here today to talk to you about mental health, which is, like I said, something that doesn't get chatted about enough. And a part of that is that we just don't have a language for it. I tend to describe myself as a crazy person, and I use that phrase very specifically because it's a phrase that has often been, it's been used as a derogatory term. It's been used as a term to demean people. But when I use that phrase, I'm trying to call attention to the fact that we don't have a great language for the way that we think for, talking about what's happening inside of our heads and what's happening inside of other people's heads. We tend to think that we are separate from our emotions, that we are this perfectly rational being and emotions just kind of happen to us and then they go away. But we also tend to think we're in total control of our thoughts, that largely the things that occur inside of our brain are within our purview, are within our ability to change and alter. And I'm here to tell you today that that's pretty much not true. That largely we are not in control of what's going on inside of our skulls. And that it really matters. Because of that, it really matters why we talk about these things, or how we talk about these things, or that we talk about them at all. So today I want to talk a little bit about how your experiences affect you. You might not necessarily believe me that this is something that you can't control. And so I want to give, make the case that this is true and that you should care about these things. Then we're going to talk for a little bit about me, because this is my presentation and Sam let me do it and you can't stop me. Then we're going to talk about why you should talk about your mental health at work. And then we're going to talk about how to talk about it, because just saying you should do it isn't, that's not the hard part. And lastly, we're going to talk about how to overcome some roadblocks to talking about it. Now, as we go through this, I want people to, if you've got questions, feel free to shout them out. I want this to be conversational. I know that this topic can be problematic. You may not feel comfortable asking the questions. But if you do have questions about, even just broader strokes of how to talk about these things, or why you feel it, maybe I'm not making the case of that you think you should talk about these things, feel free to bring that up. So I have to be, legal here. Situations here are hypothetical. The advice is representative. Every situation is different. Please don't assume that this is the correct advice. I am not a doctor, nor am I a psychiatrist, and this does not constitute medical advice. That said, let's talk about the world, your brain, and you. I think it's not a difficult thing to say that we really can't control what happens to us in life, that a large swath of the things that occur are outside of our personal control, right? You can affect your own behavior. You can affect the, how you do things. You can affect things inside of your house, at your job, et cetera. But when it comes to things like a global pandemic, for instance, just pulling an example out of a hat, we can't control that. There was nothing we could do. And I mean, that got so bad to the point that humans needed to demonstrate that we had to, take personal control. And so everybody went out and bought toilet paper, because at least that was something you could control, right? I can't protect my family from this virus, but I can go buy toilet paper and we'll have enough toilet paper for the year and we'll be set. So, and serious, that's part of what drove that whole, phenomenon. I mean, there was another part about the difference between residential and commercial paper, but anyhow, we're not in control of these things that happen to us. Causality is complex. The world is largely out of our control, right? Going back to butterfly effect and chaos theory, there are all of these things that happen and they trickle down, etc. You're not really in charge of if you get laid off at your job, right? There are things you can do to make yourself indispensable. Some of those things aren't necessarily ethical, but largely, if the things come through, right? If the company needs to make cuts, your job could be on the chopping block, and there's nothing you can do about it. These things affect us, right? When something happens to us, these things actually affect us. In general, we can't control our thoughts either. In fact, we are so bad at actually controlling the thoughts that come on inside of our brains that they've done studies on these things. Like, this is the name of a study from 2019. It's not even, can we control our thoughts? It's straight up, we're so bad at controlling our thoughts that we're just going to label this thing measuring thought control failure. Because, I mean, to use the old joke, try not to think of a gray elephant. Your brain just goes, oh, gray elephant. Oh, hey, there we go, right? We're not good at controlling the thoughts that come inside of our heads. And these things, like in this study, they found that the average thought control index score, as in they were trying to measure, how many people were able to actually control their thoughts, was not significantly above 0. Your brain just thinks things and you can't stop it. And then we tend to believe what we think without examining it. There are whole schools of therapy like CBT or, concepts or practices like mindfulness that are literally based around this concept, that you take the thing coming out of your brain and just believe it, that it's true. Or, if it's an emotion, you just say, oh, I guess we're feeling this emotion. Let's go. And we don't necessarily stop to consciously think, okay, is this a thing I believe? Is this a feeling that I should be feeling? So we have these things affecting us, these things in the world, and those are emotionally affecting us. We have these thoughts and emotions that are occurring, and we can't control these either. And those things affect how we think. When we're engaging in cognitive, logical, linear thought, our emotions affect how we actually do that, how well we do that. Donald Norman, who, by the way, is a fantastic psychologist, he wrote a book, it was originally called The Psychology of Everyday Design, and he retitled it to The Psychology of Everyday Things, rather, and he retitled it to The Design of Everyday Things. It's a fascinating book. You should absolutely read it. He's basically, like, he's gone into all of these things about UX, and if you know one psychologist as a software developer, it should absolutely be Donald Norman. Anyhow, he has a book called Emotional Design, where he talks about how your brain has kind of two running processes. The first of those is a cognitive process, not that logical, linear, what we tend to think of as our thought. And then there's this affective process. And the affective process, I'm getting ahead of my slides, cognitive, right? It's this logical, linear portion. The affective portion is designed to really sort experiences into good or bad. And it does this largely based on our past experiences. So if you found yourself in a extremely bad experience before, and you encounter yourself in that experience again, your brain is telling you, this is bad, this is very bad, this is not great. That's the root of like PTSD, is your affective process is going, this situation is very bad. And it is effectively mischaracterized a situation because of a previous negative association. So it's being busy working, sorting things into good and bad, and affecting your emotions, affect your whole body, right? I mean, think about the emotion, the way you feel emotions. If you get sad, if you actually make it to the point of feeling depressed, you feel tired, you feel exhausted, you feel achy, like you can't move. Contrast that with feeling afraid or super anxious or even angry, where there's a bunch of emotion to that energy, right? A bunch of energy to that emotion. You want to take something, want to do something with it. Yeah, go for it.
Can I ask you a random question here? So going back to this, like the cognitive side, like if I am trying to take a decision at work, which has no consequences to me personally, this still affects my cognitive part of my decision making?
Well, it's if you're experiencing an affective situation at that moment. So like if I turn around and make you feel upset or stressed or anxious, it actually diminishes your ability to make cognitive choices. You're less good at solving cognitive tasks. Contrary, if I turn around and I make you feel awesome, you're actually better at solving cognitive tasks. Right? So it's these things, like if you're coming into work and you're feeling stressed and anxious because, let's say, as a completely random example that's not random at all, you've had multiple people over to look at the foundation on your house and it's going to cost thousands of dollars to fix. Yay, living in Omaha. No, these kind of things, as they occur, they affect you. They actually affect how well you think, right? I mean, if I'm in that situation and I'm tired and upset and stressed, I'm not making great cognitive decisions. There's this whole field of if you've ever seen a talk or heard anything about like dark patterns of UX, that's literally this. The thing where you go to Kayak and they pop up a thing and they're like, there are 7 tickets left at this price and they go away in 15 minutes and it's literally a ticking timer. They're trying to make you feel anxious and stressed so you're not thinking well enough. You're making poor decisions. That's literally what they do. So, okay, maybe at this point you believe me that your emotions actually affect you, but talking about them sounds really awful. Well, okay, so let's talk about me for a second. Well, more correctly, let's talk about Art. Now, Art was born into a family with a history of mental health diagnoses: ADHD, depression, anxiety, potentially even bipolar 1. His initial symptoms manifested through acting out, especially in the face of authority. He went through several non-normative periods during his life. His conflict with his family manifested itself through severely regressive patterns in which he found himself continually engaging in conflict behavior regardless of the situation. his attention abilities were deficient and resulted in unsatisfactory schoolwork, especially once he left his non-standard learning environment of Montessori school. He was placed on a medication regime and went medication non-compliant in college, which resulted in a commensurate lack of both emotional control and attentional control, which resulted in a unsatisfactory schoolwork. He developed a set of coping mechanisms, including self-medication through significant abuse of caffeine, and eventually resought treatment and entered a medication regime again after significant amount of talk therapy, and has been medication compliant for like 8+ years at this point. He still seeks occasional, or still has occasional symptoms. Even right now, he's engaging in a different medication and then titrating off of one medicine and onto an SNRI with an attempt to engage in a medication regime that is non-stimulant based. I could go on. And I mean, like when I do this talk fully, it's a significantly long section. But the point I'm driving at here is there's a particularity to this language. And I want to contrast that with talking about who am I? And I mean, this story starts with, I always knew that I was different from other kids. I could feel it. I could sense that there was something that they could see, something they could engage, something they could sense really that I couldn't, something I was missing. And it drove me, I want to say crazy, but the behaviors, I couldn't see these things. I didn't understand why I would do certain things. I didn't understand how something would leap into my head and I would just find myself doing it. And then my parents or my teachers would ask me, well, why did you do that thing? And I would say, I don't know. And they really didn't like that answer. And so I found myself angry at them, upset. I found myself lying, attempting to cover my tracks because I couldn't explain my own behavior. And my parents tried to put me through therapy, which when I was 8, and I knew, I could hold it together for a 45-minute therapy session. And I knew I knew how good boys behaved, and I was pretty good at lying. So I lied. And he blamed my parents. Although I will say that if you are a licensed therapist and you let an 8-year-old buffalo you, that's kind of on you. So it didn't go well. He blamed my parents, and that went about as well as you can expect. I've experienced problems, managing my attention. I've experienced moments of rage. I've experienced moments where I cannot get anything done, where I'm sitting there yelling at myself, why aren't you just doing the thing? And my brain says, I don't know. And that's the only answer I get. Like I said, I can go on, and it's important to me to know, for you to know, the audience to know, that I have struggled with these things. I've been struggling with these things my entire life. I was not officially diagnosed until I was 15, but this is something I've had always and have had to deal with always. But more importantly than me getting my bona fides as a crazy person across, I want you to focus on the language here. What was different between those two stories? Do you have an example or a guess, Sam?
I mean, maybe it's the tense, like you talked about art, but you're defining who you are as an I.
The pronouns are definitely different, but there's another subtle difference in the language, and it's that I'm using, in the first story, I was using what they call clinical language. I was using language that is focused on the deficits, language that is focused on the diagnosis. This language constrains and it confines the experience that you have. And it is by its very nature emotionless. You have to remember that psychiatry came out of a period where they had, Sigmund Freud, and good old Freud was a little, let's just say a little obsessed with some things that aren't great topics for a family-friendly, meetup. But psychiatry as a whole has never really gotten over that initial speed bump, and they force themselves into this place where they're thinking of everything in terms of very strict medical definitions of things and very strict, clinical definitions of things, and using this language because it makes them seem more official, makes them seem more, I don't want to say more real. That's not the message I'm trying to get across, but it makes them seem more authoritative. On the other hand, the second story was using experiential language. It was focused on what was happening to me. It's describing and delineating my own experience, and it's based on my personal truth. And by its very nature, it is emotional. The difference between clinical and experiential language is the difference between this conversation and between this conversation. Right? It's the difference between coming out and just being a jerk about it and by centering the person inside of that conversation. Clinical language is based on passivity. It sucks power out of a person. Experiential is based on self-direction and self-responsibility. The behaviors that I did were mine. They were things I did. They happened because my brain works a certain way, but they were part of me. They were not a disease that I can get rid of. They're a part of who I am, and they're never going away. Clinical language has what they call an external locus of control, which means that it talks about the control is happening outside of the person, right? Art was diagnosed with this. He experienced that. This was happening to him. Experiential language is all about internal locus of control. These were things that I did. These were things that happened to me, and this is how I felt about it. That clinical language can encourage learned helplessness and passivity. Experiential can encourage self-directed action and that self-responsibility. Now, you can say, isn't clinical language the correct terminology? And it is. But it's also not the language that you need to be using. All of these things come out of what's called the DSM Edition 5, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Behavioral Health Edition 5. It's the big book of ways that your brain breaks, okay? I've read it. It's not a page turner. Don't recommend it as like light bedtime reading. And the way that the DSM-5 is set up is it's checklists, okay? We don't have a way for you to go in and get an MRI or an EKG and get diagnosed with something. You can't do a blood test and say, oh, you have this mental diagnosis. So what these things are checklists. It's almost like bird watching. And as you go through and talk to a psychologist or a psychiatrist, what they're doing is making note of the behaviors that they're seeing that match these checklists so that they can kind of sort you into these buckets. The diagnoses that they make aren't, like I said, there's no blood test for it. These aren't things that we go, hey, this is the way that the brain automatically works in these cases. It's just collections of symptoms. It's like bird watching where you're going like, oh, well, it has like the, yellow belly and this, and its call is this. So it's a yellow-bellied warbler. Done. It's kind of like that. And I'm not begrudging anybody, especially psychiatry, having these buckets. You have to have something that you can start grappling with, right? But what that means is they're not as definitive as you think they are.
Yeah, and would it be fair to say, like, if you have those big buckets, like you are often, missing out on folks who fall somewhere in between those buckets? Because like those like yes or no checklists are very Boolean. It might not be 1 or 0.
Right. And so that's it's actually it's going to be based on the experience of the person judging you as well. Right. So if you take, for example, the experience I had with my therapist, all he has to go off of is my effectively testimony in that moment. Right. And so if he goes, well, what he's saying doesn't match this checklist, doesn't mean anything. Mm-hmm. And so it's up to their judgment as far as how, I think that's a couple slides. Yeah. The duration and the intensity of that experience is up to the subjective judgment of the person judging it. But above and beyond that, cultural norms can affect what's even considered to be a diagnosis. Homosexuality was a diagnosis up until I think DSM-3. It's based, this is a bunch of psychiatrists sitting in a room and deciding what is and what is not available to be diagnosed with. A perfect example would be something like Asperger's syndrome, which got removed it was in the DSM-4, it was removed in the DSM-5, and it was folded into what is now a spectrum of autism. Right? So you have whole people who've been diagnosed with this, and now it's no longer a real thing because the cultural norm of that behavior has shifted. There's a whole theory about ADHD that it just kind of popped out of the side because what happened is we used to have a bigger sphere of what we considered normal behavior. But as communication has increased and the rapidity of communication has increased and social norms have become more easily transmissible, that sphere has kind of shrunken and ADHD just kind of went boop out the side. And then we go, oh, that's abnormal, which is why it looks like in the 90s, you just have this whole swath of kids suddenly appearing out of nowhere. We're seeing the same thing with autism over the last couple of decades where it's like, autism wasn't a thing. It's like, well, they didn't have the diagnosis before. That's why it's not a thing. So it looks like it's coming out of nowhere, but it's not necessarily. These behaviors aren't. And I'm not saying it did or didn't, but because I don't have I definitely don't have the degree to say that that's true. But these things come out of nowhere. And then lastly, you have the question of, okay, look, this anxiety and like if you have anxiety and depression, those are parts of the normal human experience, right? Being anxious, being depressed, those are normal. At what point do they become not normal? At what point is it enough to suddenly qualify as a diagnosis? That's a subjective decision. And it's really hard. So I'm not saying, again, that we don't use these things. What I'm saying is that when I talk about a diagnosis, when you talk about a diagnosis, when somebody else talks about a diagnosis, I want you to think of it that diagnoses are not prescriptive, they are descriptive. They do not say, it's not like the flu, it's not like COVID even, where it's, okay, when you get that, here are the symptoms that you get, right? You have the coughing, you have fever, you have the no smell and no taste. Those are symptoms. That's the way we describe medical symptoms. They are prescriptive. When we have a mental health diagnosis, these things are descriptive. We are attempting to describe the way that these people kind of behave. But not everybody who has that diagnosis has every symptom. And not everybody who has the symptoms has that diagnosis. So really, this is super important. Like, think about it and say these. Yeah, go ahead.
Quick question. And by the way, Art, like I've hung out with you, but this is like, I actually have not seen you talk about this. I may have missed. I know you'd like do mental health type talks at a few conferences, but I may not have sat through this. So I appreciate you, talking about your own experiences. It cannot be easy, but you're drawing from your own life experiences to tell us what it is. But
Thank you.
To the point of, the cultural thing that you talked about, and you had something down at the bottom which said, like, not everyone can afford it. So that's a very scary place to be, right? Because it comes down to your society and what is and is not acceptable.
Yes. And I mean, I've talked to adults that have asked me, like, is it worth getting diagnosed with ADHD? I'm like, only if you need it, only if you think you need treatment. Because the treatment is gated behind the diagnoses now, because your insurance won't cover it if you don't have the diagnosis, right? And it's not cheap as an adult. We're talking easily $700 to $1,000 to go through the diagnostic test for ADHD.
Wow.
And that's after insurance if you have it, if they even cover the diagnostic test. So it's hard. And what I want people to take away is, like, just because you know one person's experience on this stuff doesn't mean you know another's. Just because your Aunt Irma or whatever had bipolar, the way that she behaved and the way she acted and what her experience was in the world is not going to be the same as everybody else who has bipolar. Even if you have a thing, your experience isn't going to be the same, because it isn't necessarily the same thing deep down. It's just something else that's in the same bucket. Mm-hmm. I tend to prefer to think of this as lived experience. Right? I tend to prefer to think of it as, okay, what is the experience that you have going through the world? So why does talking about this matter so much? I'm here talking about it and I'm trying to convince you, but why? You are the only advocate for your own experience. What is happening inside of your head is a thing known only to you, unless you are secretly a mind reader or someone else is secretly a mind reader, in which case I have to rewrite some parts of this talk. But as right now, the only person that knows what it's like inside of your head is you. And if you are not out there asking for what it is you need, if you are not out there being your own advocate, you cannot be successful. I had a coworker that I worked with at a previous job who used to fall asleep at his desk. And I don't mean like cute little, like, just head back in his chair, full on snoring. It's like, dude, wake up. We used to laugh at him about it, like behind his back. Nobody ever asked him, is anything wrong? Nobody ever asked him, like, hey, is there anything we can do? And it's actually a huge regret. We didn't know. We made up a story in our heads. And that's exactly what all of your coworkers and everyone else in your life is doing about you. And I can guarantee you that the story that they are making up is not anywhere as close to as flattering as the story that's actually going on inside of your head. And I could give a whole talk on, I probably should at some point give a whole talk on just the fundamental attribution error and how that drives all of this. But point is, if you're not out there talking about it, they're making up a story for you. And it's not one you want them to have. As you share things, right? Sharing can create cohesion. If you're doing this at work, being vulnerable can actually make other people like you more. And that's super important. It also means that you're not ignoring things. If you're having an effective experience, and this goes beyond just having mental health challenges, if you are encountering things like your parents having cancer, or like I talked about earlier, even something as dumb, well, relatively dumb, as your house be having problems, and you've got things you've got to figure out how to pay for, etc. Those are things that you need to acknowledge that they exist. And if you're pretending that you can leave those at the door of your work, then when you sit down to gauge and like do your sprint planning, you're lying. Because you're not going to be as effective. You won't clear as many points. You won't be able to get the same amount of work done, or at least not as well, because you're busy thinking about these other things. Your brain is chewing on them in the background. Essentially, it's a process running back there, taking up space, right? So you need to actually be honest with these things because it allows you to talk about them and replace that bad story with a good story. So what keeps us from talking about it, right? What stops us? Well, we've got a couple things. A lack of good language is one of them. We kind of covered that already. But there's also fear, shame, and this funny little thing that I like to call facile optimism. We're going to go through each of those things. So let's figure out how to talk about your experience. Let's get some better language around these things. We're going to run through a bunch of examples here because we need a little help, because we don't want to have this scenario happen. And this is actually something somebody has said to me to my face. And his name was not Steve, but it was just like, really? It's okay.
So before you go on, I have to comment something. And I know, Art, you're into design and aesthetics, but I'm guessing these are all your sketches?
Yes.
Okay, this is mind-blowing. This is amazing. I had no idea you were this good.
Which is funny because I think I've gotten better since these. That's the problem, is going back and giving older talks. I'm like, oh, my line work is not great here.
That's amazing.
Thank you.
Before we go on, Doug M, I'm guessing this is good friend Doug Meyer, maybe, or it's a different Doug. But hey, thanks for the comment. Working remote, we don't have conversations in passing. Makes it harder to be personal. Yes.
It absolutely does.
Yes.
There's there's a talk burning in my head at some point about how I saw a tweet that was talking about how we've taken these things that used to be teams, where teams have constant conversation and they're interdependent and reliant on each other and they succeed or fail together. And over COVID, what's happened is we've all become work groups where we're just kind of rolling on our own thing and we don't really interact with each other and don't have this level of interdependence that we did. And part of the reason of that is we can't have that interdependent, conversations in passing.
Yeah. And I saw something funny just the other day on, how the camera is great. Like it lets you see somebody, but it's a very different you that you're presenting at a team meeting, because like the moment the camera is off, they're like, oh, we're just
right. I don't even have to be on, right? Yeah,
exactly. It's just not the same as seeing a person in real life. So yes, it's
well, and I'm
definitely harder.
convinced. I don't have data for this, so this is completely me spitballing. I am convinced that your brain does not see this the same way that it sees a whole person.
Yeah.
That there are other pieces of communication that are not coming across, that your brain makes your brain go, oh, it's just like TV. I don't have to pay attention to it. I don't need to build an emotional response to this person.
Yeah.
But okay, let's meet Jordan and Taylor. And we'll walk through these fairly quickly. The slides are up and available, so you can always come back and look at these things. But rule 0 here is you can't solve or fix anything. Now that sounds really nihilistic, and actually it's fast. There's a photo that they took at Tekorama, Netherlands, of me in front of this slide, and I love it because it's just like me going, "This is my whole aesthetic. You can't do anything. It's all terrible." What I mean by this is, if you engage in a conversation with somebody else about their mental health or your mental health, the goal for both of you is not to fix someone. You are not going to be able to fix someone, because they don't need to be fixed. Okay. If they're experiencing depression, if they're experiencing anxiety, like telling them, oh, I read this great thing about meditation or whatever, shut up. Like, if you tell somebody that is more, actually depressed, that they just need to smile more because Amy Cuddy did all of this research about how body posture and poses actually affect your mental thing, they will stab you and you will deserve it. Okay. So I want you to let's get that out there. You are not there to fix this person. So don't start offering suggestions. I guarantee you they've heard them all before. So, okay. Conversational type 1A. Jordan is going to ask Taylor here for future support, for support in the future. So we're all engineers. Sometimes it's hard to, do people things. So here's a script. I could really use some support. Can you please do this help for action here? Or I don't know if you knew this, but I deal with, or I'm having problems with this specific kind of experience. You've been helpful to me in the past. Would it be okay in the future if I ask you to do this thing when this event happens? So for example, Jordan could say, hey, I've been having a tough time with my mood lately. If you see me starting to isolate myself, can you just grab me and take me out for a cup of coffee? That's a way of asking for future support, right? It doesn't have to be huge. It can just be, look, I'm feeling this way. Here's a thing you can do. Can you do that for me? Now, ideally, Jordan is going to be clear and direct in both what they're asking Taylor to do and when they're asking Taylor to do it. And ideally, Taylor isn't going to problem solve. Remember, rule 0, not like, oh, hey, starting to isolate yourself. If you tried just going to meetups, don't do it. Also, and potentially more importantly, Taylor is not going to promise anything they're uncomfortable doing. If Jordan's asking for support and Taylor says, oh, yeah, I can help you with that, and then in the moment they don't feel comfortable doing it, that's way worse, because that person might be relying on your support. Conversational type 1B here. Jordan, in a critical moment, asked Taylor for support. Okay, we got to stop and talk about critical moments. Okay. A critical moment is a moment when your normal coping strategies just no longer work. When the anxiety, it gets too bad, when the situation is different enough, when the trauma response is too high, and things that you normally do to deal with the situation break down. In those moments, you need to be careful. Okay. I want you not to be alarmist, because the elephant in the room here is suicide, especially if someone's feeling depression. But if you go running to the authorities the second somebody starts to tell you that they're experiencing suicidal thoughts, that they're experiencing even just depression, you're not necessarily helping them, and you can be making the situation worse. You need to get the facts. You need to ask, are you considering suicide? Do you have a plan? Don't assume someone is safe, but don't assume someone is not safe. If you get a clear and unambiguous statement of intent, that is the point in time in which you call for help. So, okay, that was a little depressing, but as an example, if Jordan's in that critical moment You might not know this, but I'm dealing with some mood issues and I need some help telling which emotions are real right now. Ideally, in that moment, Jordan's going to ask for whatever they need right now, as specifically as possible, as specifically as they can manage. And if they need to leave the situation, they explain they need to exit the situation. Because sometimes people can feel trapped by social demands, etc. Ideally, Taylor's going to remain calm and doesn't take Jordan leaving as an insult. Because that can happen too, right? If somebody is like, you can feel like, oh, hey, they had to leave because of me. So, okay, conversational type 2A, Jordan offering future support to Taylor. Now, we talked about asking, and this is offering. This is somebody saying, hey, I think I can help you. So we have an offering script. I noticed that behavioral observation here. Can we talk about it? And then, do you think you could use action here? Can I help provide that? So for instance, hey, I noticed that when somebody disagrees with you in a meeting, you stop talking and you shut down, even though you clearly care a lot about what you're saying. Would you like me to help you back you up when that happens? In this moment, Jordan is providing very clear guidance on what they're willing to do. And ideally, Jordan is going to accept a no answer gracefully and doesn't take it personally. Sometimes that person doesn't want help at all, or maybe just doesn't want help from you. That's okay. That's their choice to make. So ideally, Jordan's going to keep their judgments and opinion out of it. Ideally, Taylor is only going to talk about their mental state if they want to. Okay. Forcing somebody to talk about it just will never go well. And if they have something different that Jordan can do, Taylor can provide clear guidance for that different thing. To be then is Taylor in a critical moment and Jordan offering support. So it seems like you're going for a rough moment. If you want, I can cover for you if you need to step out. These things don't have to be huge, right? The examples that I'm walking through are small for a reason. These things can be the difference, a huge difference for people. Now, ideally in that moment, Jordan's going to keep their judgments and opinions out of it. And they're going to follow the safety guidelines unless they've prearranged a support response with Taylor. Ideally, Taylor's going to be honest about what they need, even if it's nothing. And that they aren't going to assume that they're going to be a waste of Jordan's time. Your brain can lie to you and say things like that. Conversational type 3 is Jordan and Taylor explaining their experience to Jordan. So we have an explanation script. These are for situations where you behaved a certain way and you're trying to explain what's going on inside of your head. When this event happens, I sometimes, often, or always feel like these things. To cope or to deal with that, I do this thing. So when I'm in a meeting and someone asks me a question, my brain freezes and all I can think about is what happens if I screw up and answer incorrectly. To cope with that, I spend time before the meeting obsessing over all the things people could ask me, so I'm not very responsive. Ideally, in that moment, again, Jordan's going to listen respectfully and won't problem solve. And ideally, Taylor's not going to blame people or go ranting, because that's not helpful either. But they also shouldn't apologize for their feelings. Conversational type 4 is the check-in. And we do this all the time, right? We have a check-in script. Hey, how are you doing? Right? This is every Monday, right? How was your weekend? How are you doing? Those moments can be turned into actual moments where you are vulnerable with somebody. Now, if you ask that person something, if Taylor asked Jordan that question, Jordan can respond with as much depth as they feel comfortable, including not at all, right? They're in control of how much they share. Now, ideally, Taylor legitimately cares about how Jordan is doing. If you don't, and you're just using it as a way to build rapport with somebody, it's not going to go well. Conversational type 5. It's Jordan and Taylor talking like normal humans. Hello, fellow human. It's a good day to enjoy things like oxygen and carbon, is it not? It is, since I'm also clearly a human. I too enjoy these things, as well as making pleasant conversation through my mouth parts, right? Joke, but point is, once you've started having a conversation with somebody about their mental health, not every conversation has to be about that. You don't have to constantly be asking them, oh, hey, how are you doing? How's the depression today? That's not, they don't want to hear that. So you can have a conversation. They're still human. You can still talk with them about things that have nothing to do with their mental health. Let's talk with each other and, like they're normal human beings. But above all, remain compassionate. It's hard to have the conversation on both sides. It's hard to ask the questions and it's hard to respond. But if you don't want to talk about this, right? If you're uncomfortable, then don't. I really can't emphasize that enough. Whoa, If you don't trust your coworkers, don't do this. You'll have to be the judge of whether you feel like you can or not. But I'm not trying to tell you that you should do this in a situation where you feel unsafe, because that won't go well either. So, okay, talked about language. Let's talk about fear.
Can I ask a quick question here, Art? I'm forgetting the exact term you used. The critical time, I think.
Oh, the critical moment,
Yeah, critical moment. So, in a non-ideal world, what if you want to, back somebody, but you don't know exactly what that critical moment is, or it's fluctuating based on situations or stresses? Would you read signs, or would you, have some things that you agree on? Like if this person says, if I do this, then you might want to help.
You can prearrange a support response, actually. And I believe we'll talk about a little bit later some of the ways you can do that.
Okay.
If I don't get to that, bug me about it again, and I'll touch base on that. Right. Let's talk about fear real quick. So, talk about fear, shame, and facile optimism at once. Facile optimism is fairly easy to get through, so let's get through that. Okay. Now, this is the term that I kind of made up, but I like it because what it talks about is this experience we have where we minimize our own experiences to maintain a sense of control over it. Remember, I was talking about the human need for control earlier when I was talking about toilet paper? We have this tendency to go, oh, well, it's not so bad. This thing isn't so bad. I've got control over it. I've got a hang of it. Like, I have a handle on it. It's fine. And, this is fine dog.gif, right? Like, everything's on fire and you're just like, this is fine. Everything's okay, because you want to feel like you have an internal sense of control. And we do this a ton. So you could get around this by having the conversation before things seem dire. When things start to kind of go south, you can frame this conversation as a thing that might happen later. And it makes it easier because everybody appreciates a heads up. You can also turn around and use other people, because other people might be able to see how this is affecting you better than you can. So fighting that minimization is a question of just getting to the point of having the conversation straight up, even if you don't feel like it's quite ready yet or quite time. As far as fear, I know it's hard. I'm asking you to do a hard thing in that moment that it is going to be the hardest. It's easier after an experience. Like if you've gone through something and then afterwards you're like, okay, here's what was going on. It's less effective.
Hey, Art, on that point, if I can just pause and read something the chat room is saying. I don't know if I'm reading your screen name right. B Anchor or B1 Core. I think so. Clearly, somebody who joins us for a few things, and thank you for that. Very proud of following you guys, because this is real. The conversation touched my heart. I've been through this many a times, as have all of us, and that's exactly what you're saying, Art. Like, this is hard.
Yeah, it is hard, and I mean that's, even it doesn't have to be a diagnosis, right? It can be something, your cat could die, like it. The whole point of this is that all of these tools that I'm giving you aren't just for the mental health thing. They're also for talking about just every affective experience that you're going through in your life.
True. But thank you for the comment, though. Yeah,
thanks. And I feel for you, man. I hope you don't have to go through it many more times. Yes, I mean, fighting that fear is hard. The best thing I can tell you is try to prepare for it before it happens. Try to sit down and have that conversation about checklists, about, if, like you said, prearranging support responses with people and saying, look, if this happens, if I start to behave this way, these are some things you can do to help. If you see this is what I need. Figuring it out. Again, I'm getting ahead of my slides, right? Who are you going to tell if something happens? Who are you going to go to at work? Decide before something starts to go wrong. That's a way to fight fear, and making that plan. Building habits. What habits can you start right now that will help you if something happens? And making space to find the mental space, or making the time to find the mental space to have that conversation. It's really easy to put it off. And so forcing yourself to schedule those things can help you a ton.
Art, I gotta say, the footnotes that you have are just hilarious.
Thank you.
You should spend more time on this. Like Steve sounds like a jerk.
He's an
Don't tell
absolute
Steve.
jerk. No,
But
I put him
this
in there
is hilarious.
mostly for people going back to the slides because I don't have a ton of other content on it, but also they're for me. That's because then I'm can look at them when I'm scrolling through the presentation and be like, oh yeah, that's Steve. Sorry if anybody's named Steve, by the way. Okay, let's talk about shame. And this part is really important. So time for some R-truth, okay? If you are struggling with your own experiences, whether you have a diagnosis or not, you are not going to go psycho. You are not less than human. You are not incapable of functioning. You are not worth less than normal people. You are not less intelligent. You are not dangerous. And you are not broken. And you are still capable of having human relationships. You are still capable of making decisions about your own life. You are still capable of participating in every part of that life. And you are still capable of logical, rational thought, no matter how many diagnoses they give you. It's okay to not be okay. You have nothing to be ashamed of. And I put that in there because I need the reminder as much as anybody. This is not a thing we hear often enough.
Yeah, let me ask you a question, and
Sure.
maybe you will touch upon this. All of this makes sense. Oh, hey, our good friend Jeremy is here. Hello, Jeremy.
Hi, Jeremy.
Art and me saw Jeremy, I think, last week or maybe the week before in beautiful Knoxville, Tennessee. Okay, so you talked about Steve, but you talked about your safe place at work. But what if you have the fear of repercussions coming from somebody who is, in a way, you depend on that person as for your career to advance. Maybe not a direct manager, but you fear that something is going to come back to you. So
we will get to that.
Okay. Perfect.
We will, I promise. Actually, right after this section. So, I mean, part of it, you can just seek support from those you already trust, right? If you can limit the people that you're asking for support to people that you already have trust, and they're not necessarily people in your chain of command, or who have a significant effect on your career advancement, et cetera, those are people that are easier for you to go to. And so if you're having those moments of shame, et cetera, it's easier to go to those people. But let's talk about those what ifs, right? Because that's the thing. As I've been talking through this, and your question's a perfect example, everybody's sitting there thinking, but what if this thing happens? What if this thing happens? What if this other thing happens? How do I do this? What if nobody trusts me anymore? Well, being honest and vulnerable often improves trust. I talked about it building cohesion as a team. You being vulnerable about how you actually feel and what's going on inside of your head can actually make other people trust you more, because you were honest and they know that if you're having a moment, you will tell them. If you do have a problem or a situation where somebody comes across and feel, you tell them something and it feels like they no longer trust you. The experiences you're having, the things they're saying, the way they're behaving makes you feel like there is no trust anymore. Have the conversation. Literally just sit down and ask them, what can I do to regain your trust? Now, again, that's hard, but it can help to just be honest about it. And it offers you a chance. Now you've got a conversation. Even if they're resistant to it, it gives you a chance to be there advocating for your story and advocating for your experience. What if everybody treats you like you're fragile? I spoke with somebody who literally got passed over for a job because his boss was like, we didn't want to stress you. It's like, what do you think passing him over for a promotion did? So what you can do is try and help people see the boundaries of what's stressful to you. These are the things that I know are not great for me. Those are the things we can avoid. Other stuff is fine. Helping people see those things, because they're just guessing. Even if they're trying to be helpful, they're just guessing. And so being clear about it can help them be more helpful to you. You can also set up a communication plan to tell them when it gets to be too much. A way for like prearranged signals, basically, for you to go, nope, I'm having a problem.
Hey, Art, just a quick pause. Hey, Austin Jill is raiding us with a party. So thank you for the raid. We appreciate it very much. And welcome people, new people. And this is me, Sam, and my good friend Art up here. And Art's talking about mental health.
Yeah.
And all our, facing our fears and making a plan and all the good things.
So what if they don't believe you? To which my only reply is like, just, that's painful. That really hurts. When you're vulnerable, when you share your experience with someone and they tell you, oh, you're just making this up, or, oh, come on, it can't be that bad. We do still live in a time and place where that happens, where there are people whose bosses, your boss, or I have a person whose spouse did not believe them. And I'm just like, how freaking, that's like a knife right in the chest. I don't know. I mean, I can't tell you too many things to do, but the best I can tell you is find other allies and get ready for a fight. If your boss does not believe you, if you're, the people in your command chain do not believe you that this is a thing that you are experiencing, get ready for battling as best you can, or find a way to get out. What if you get bullied? What if you get fired? Again, use your best judgment. Only you can make the call if this is safe, right? In some cases, or in a lot of cases, you end up relying on your company's HR department to be in your corner, and they're not. Your HR department is not your friend. They are there for your company and not for you. Doesn't matter how friendly they are. Doesn't matter if they bring in donuts on Mondays and bagels on Fridays. They could make a birthday cake. Sally from HR could make a birthday cake for every employee on their birthday, and they're still there for the company and not for you. Okay. So you have to be careful with that. In the situations like you were describing, Sam, earlier about, how do you tell your boss? How do you bring these things up? My recommendation is trial balloons. Try revealing something small, something relatively safe. Sit down and ask a question about, or, talk about an experience you had about just not being able to sleep one night, or having an experience where you had something happen and you had to go to the doctor. And see what happens. How do they behave? How do they treat you? How do they treat you? The way you're talking about things. Do they respond positively? Are you hearing the story a week later back from somebody else that you didn't tell? That's probably not a safe environment. And those are the situations that you need to be careful about. But if you hear, if this person is telling you things and you find it that it's not, impacting you, or they're not responding negatively, just try a little bit more, right? And to some extent, watch how they respond to other people. If they're talking to you about, behind somebody else's back, then they're probably doing the same to other people about you. So here's some stuff you can do tomorrow, all right, to help your mental health at work, to start talking about these things. Sit down and ask yourself, is there anything big going on right now, or anything likely to happen in the near future? And I wrote this before COVID, but, is there anything big going on right now? Like land wars in Asia. Sit down and ask yourself, what is happening? Is there an event? Is there something coming up? And set up plans for it. Look at those things and say, I'm likely to be, be honest with yourself and say, I'm likely to be affected by this experience, right? Going back to the beginning, these are affective experiences and they're likely to affect me. So what am I going to do? What are my plans? So, for instance, I'm in the middle of switching psych meds right now. I sat down with my team and literally at the end of a stand-up, I'm like, hey, can I have 5 minutes? I'm having this happen. I'm likely to be a little squirrely for this week and potentially the next month. If you see me not doing something that I need to be doing, or you see me putting something off, or I'm letting something slip, just please bring it up to my attention and I'll make sure I get it. It can be as simple as that, right? But that bit of vulnerability can prompt other discussions, can, demonstrate that you're being mature about it even. You can start listening closely to your team to see if it's safe to share. Like I said, if you're hearing them gossip about people, it's probably not safe for you to be sharing those things. If they're talking about people with respect, then maybe it's time to have those conversations. Bring up the idea of sharing feelings with your team. Even just bring this up and say, like, look, in the middle of, you talk about retros, and we do retros all the time, and then you put in the same, action items that never get fixed or whatever. Or maybe that's just my retros. Bringing up the question of like, hey, how did you feel about this sprint? Were you angry about it? Because sometimes I'm angry about sprints. And see how your coworkers respond to that. If they shut it down and they're just like, what, this is dumb, I'm not going to talk about it, then it's probably not a very safe place to bring up other kinds of experiences. So, okay, let's walk it back and do some takeaways here. Your thoughts and your emotions kind of affect your work. They change how you think. Being able to discuss your experience with your coworkers is important to your team's resilience, to your ability to deliver effectively on the things you have to do. You can enable those discussions by using experiential language, by being descriptive and not prescriptive, by being compassionate, and by recognizing that just because you know the experience for one person doesn't mean you know the experience for everybody. You can avoid the problems of facile optimism by developing plans beforehand and preventing yourself from minimizing that experience in the moment. You can conquer fear by remembering that you are stronger than your fear. And remember that you own your experience. You have to own it. No one else can. And that you have nothing to be ashamed of. You don't need to go through the workday carrying the load that you're carrying alone. And everybody can work together toward a better future. So thanks very much, Sam, for having me. I don't think I have it on here, but if I get to plug my own stuff, I have a Twitch stream where I do my own, I create all of my talks on Twitch now. So if you want to watch like what it takes to build one of these things from blank PowerPoint to, actually before that, like blank document to an abstract to a PowerPoint to drawing these slides, to doing a dry run.
Wow, I didn't know that. So you actually draw these things on a stream?
Yes.
Wow. All right.
And I can go into the cognitive stuff that help, like why I do it that way. It's not just to share it, but anyhow, yeah. I mean, if people have questions or are comfortable asking any questions, feel free. And if you're not comfortable asking them in any kind of public channel, my Twitter handle's on the slides. My DMs are always open.
Yeah. No, this is, like you said, it's a lot, but I mean, who doesn't have things that's causing us stress?
Literally nobody.
That's called real, and that's living life.
Yeah. If you don't, I want your life.
Yeah. Okay, so I want to ask you a couple of things based on some things that you have said, and that kind of stuck. So you mentioned how like we are not often in control, or actually never in control of how our emotions get away from us sometimes. To that specific example where you said like you are conscious of like, if I say this at a meeting, I might be opening myself up to people asking me this number of things, and then you're over planning and you're hesitant to ask. What are some strategies to cope with trying to over prepare, or that kind of ends up being you not saying the things that you care about?
I recommend having ADHD. It works great for me. Then things just fall out of your mouth and there's no filter. No, obviously that's not great either. Some of it is a degree of trust, right? But some of it is a question of sitting back and asking yourself, what are the consequences likely to be? If you're in most jobs, the consequences for you speaking your mind in a meeting are not likely to be that you will be immediately fired, unless you are in an incredibly toxic job, in which case I'm sorry.
But, and then you should leave, or if your if your life affords that kind of luxury, then like you said, like there are times when you really need to look for the door.
Yes, and that's, but I think it's what they call right sizing the consequences. looking back and saying, what are the likely consequences of me actually saying this thing, and trying to predict, which sometimes the brain's not great at. So another trick is to look back from 5 years from now and say, will I regret not saying this thing? And your brain is actually better at that, about kind of projecting backward into the past. And it's like you're projecting forward to allow yourself to look backward, which is weird, but it actually works. The other way to think about it is really to put some cognitive energy into thinking about what's important to you. Beforehand, like before the meeting, go, okay, what are the things that I really want to say and that I really want people to hear? And that can be a way to motivate yourself to, well, one, it can be a way to motivate yourself to talk about the things that you care about. But two, it can be a way of also realizing what ground you can cede, right? Conversations that people can start, and you're just like, I don't care. I realized I don't care about this thing. Because there's a tendency, especially as a technical person, to have an opinion about everything technical.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, well said. Our good friend M. Dugam is saying, change your job or change your job. Yes. You want to believe that, in this day and age, no matter what, industry or company you're working in, you have a team that you can trust. Like these are fellow humans who you hang out with. They work with you day in and day out. But, that common sense is not so common. Like, I've been in some toxic places, and yes, you can, change how your team functions, how they see you, or try to change that, or change your job.
Yeah. Well, it's actually a fascinating thing. I'm in the middle of reading up on some stuff on psychological safety. And one of the fascinating things that Amy Edmondson, excuse me. I'm looking at the book down on the floor. She's a researcher of psychological safety and has been since the 90s. And she talks about how psychological safety isn't an organizational thing. It's actually at the team level. It's like a microclimate almost. And so you can have a team that is psychologically safe inside of a wider, more toxic organization. That might not necessarily help your chances as far as promotion, as far as, interacting outside of that team itself, but it can give you a space inside of that to kind of thrive, and someplace where you can, well, thrive is probably not the best word, but at least survive. And you can use that as a space, like you can watch each other's backs inside of that, right? If you can galvanize your internal team to be psychologically safe and to feel like it's you against the rest of the toxic organization, that's not the world's most healthy or like time, but it's better than feeling like it's you alone against everybody else.
True. Yeah. Something else that you had said towards the beginning, it kind of stuck with me. Like when you are trying to do simple, relaxing things, maybe booking flights for a vacation, or doing something, everything seems to be in our lives driven by causing you anxiety, so you cannot think and decide. Why is it so? Is it how we humans take bad decisions, and like why are we trying to force people to take bad decisions because it's beneficial to us? It's a
how
$1 million
leftist am I
question.
allowed to get? No. I mean, some of this goes back to Henry Ford, and the whole concept of induced demand, where largely we don't need a lot of the things in our lives that we have. I mean, for a perfect example, grocery delivery. Now, up until the pandemic, what that was an opportunity for a grocery store to offer free or discounted delivery and get you to expect that service, to make it a part of your life, a part of your habits. And then they start ramping up the cost of it. That's called the process of induced demand. It is a similar thing with all of these dark patterns of UX, which is a term you can find. There's a speaker, Courtney Heitman, who's also out of Omaha. She works at Gallup. I don't know if there's talks recorded, but she has a talk on the dark patterns of UX. And I know there are a couple other people that do as well. These things that you're talking about to try and cause you anxiety to have you make worse decisions? And the answer is there are so many products out there and so many things out there and so many choices we have to make and so many things we're advertised at now that we're inured to it. We're awash in advertisements. We're drowning in them. So you can't make any more impact on your buying decisions. And so what they've turned around and started to do is if you go to the site and you're like, you get, you finally click on an ad, they try and convert you, right? They try and pull you into these conversions where it's like, now you have to click and buy because the world will explode if you don't put this thing into your cart in the next 30 seconds. And it makes the entirety of the web extremely stressful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And Doug is mentioning something here. Oh, sorry, you're going to say something?
No, go for it.
Okay, so dignity at work. Sometimes the workplace becomes a machine and people are just cogs, and you need to actively show dignity to each other. Yes. Unfortunately, yes. And I will say this, like I have seen, some people, some friends in the last, couple of years where they genuinely liked the teams that they worked in and the companies they worked for. But, like you were saying, sometimes it comes down to a business decision of something bad happening. And no matter how comfortable we get, I think it makes sense to watch out for our personal backs, or a couple of, like you said, like your safety net of friends, maybe.
Until something changes as far as the broader economic organization of at least the U.S., and to some large extent the global economy, you're kind of screwed on that front. Like, we can't operate in a world where we put everybody human-centric, like where everything is human-centric and human first, because if you try to do that, the rest of the system is arrayed against you and it won't go well. My camera keeps panning back and forth. Sorry. I'm not sure what it's doing. What I mean is, as you go through and take that as a capitalist example, right? If the business wants to survive, they feel that they need to lay people off. Now, you can make an argument about why are they laying people off when, if you work for a large company that's done, say, a stock buyback in the last 5 years or the last 6 months, why are you laying people off, idiots? Point is, I wish more organizations were human-centric and human-focused. At a certain point, companies get too large to think of other people as humans, right? You've got what's called Dunbar's number, which is a number out of sociology, which is something like 200 and change, which is the number of people that you can actually have an actual relationship with. You can actually be friends with. And after that, they turn into faces. They turn into, like you said, cogs. So you have to be human at that other level. You have to be able to advocate for other people at that other level and try and center those things. But it also is the other way. Like, why are you here, right? Your work isn't a family. 150? Okay. Thank you.
It's even less. Yeah.
Workplaces tend to talk about that, we're a family. No, you're not. Families don't lay off Aunt Sarah because they had a bad year. So at best, the best community or best workplaces that I've worked in are communities where they actually do interact with each other, and that there is something that keeps people there beyond just the paycheck. And those are the places where you can really start to make some changes and care about that human dignity you were talking about.
Yeah. And this dignity thing is so important. Like, why is it so difficult for us to treat other humans as humans? And everybody has issues. And you had it in one of the slides. Like, if you look at the spectrum of all of us humans, like when we come to work across our, different types of orientations, religion, sex, color, whatever that we are bringing to the table as us, you're left to wonder, like, what is normal? Like, what do you define as normal? That you are different. Like, we are all who we are. and we are trying to do the work that we are supposed to do. So why is it so difficult to have dignity at work?
Well, do you have another hour? Because we could talk about in groups and out groups. No, but like the short answer is really, it's a question of what your identity is and what groups you think you belong to. And there are a whole bunch of psychological things at play with once you leave your head. Okay. The short answer is it's impossible for us to model another human being in our heads. Humans are too complex and our brains are not essentially powerful enough to, one, powerful enough, and two, we don't know enough about the other person to accurately model them in our heads. Even people we've known for a long time, there are things that they can think, whole things that can be secrets to us. Your partner, right? I've been having a partner for over 20 years. There's still things that I'm like, really? And that's normal. You cannot hold a whole human in your head. And so our brain takes shortcuts. And there are a number of different shortcuts that make other people seem less real to us. And that when we start thinking about, let's think about, do other people feel this? When we think about other people, we just think about a whole bunch of copies of us because we're the only ones that we know really well. So there are a whole bunch of these cognitive biases that drive us behaviorally to not think about other people as humans. And especially when we're pushed into a situation where we have to think rationally and logically about our human survival, i.e., a standard economic situation, right? If it turns into, if you frame everything as far as zero sum, where it's, if you succeed, then I succeed less. If you win, then I'm winning less, or I outright lose. Then those are situations that the human brain just starts grasping for whatever it can get and screw other people. And unfortunately, there have been a lot of companies. This was really big in the 80s, and it's less big now. But like the Jack Welch era of IBM, he was famous for that. And there are still people. Elon Musk is an example of people who create companies that work like this, where there's no loyalty and everybody's kind of clamoring for position, and essentially it's a zero-sum game with each other to compete. And when you have a situation where you're competing with other people, explicitly competing with other people, then there's not very much chance to sit back and think of that other person as a human, because, not to over dramatize it, but like in a wartime situation, right? The whole reason that we go through things like boot camp, et cetera, is to drill into other humans' heads that it's okay to shoot other humans. That's not a normal human response, largely, unless you are directly in danger. But like shooting somebody else who's not necessarily directly at danger of you, that's not normal. And it's driven by the situation and by previous experiences that we've had, previous traumas in some cases, as you've gone through your job. Sorry, I rambled for a bit, but.
No, well said. Yeah, this is very in-depth, makes you, think back into, what our actions are, perceived as every day as we live and work with humans. So Art, I want to thank you for taking the time to talk about this and making this personal, making this experiential for all of us. So
absolutely, thank you for having me.
And chat room, M. Bianca, Jeremy Bites, Austin, Jill, thank you. And thanks for keeping this conversational. And I hope you all had some things to take away from this amazing artwork that Art has going on, let alone everything else. I'm just blown away by your sketches.
Thank you.
But you know where to follow Art. His Twitter handle is right there. So yeah.
It's the same thing on Twitch. So if you're looking for that.
Yeah. So thank you all. And Jeremy's still here. Thanks, Jeremy. So I hope you have a great rest of your evening. And try to, we can all just try to be as productive as we can. We all have things going on, and then the world has been a fun place of late. So please take care, and we shall see you on the next stream. If you are somebody who had signed up on Meetup, we do try to spend a few minutes on Teams and get offline. So hopefully I'll see a couple of you there. But if not, I'll see you next month for this same user group meeting. So thank you all, and have a great rest of your day.